Welcome to the Fear and Greed Saturday edition, a look at some of the most memorable stories of the week. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Well, Sean, our new format is all about the two of us each nominating what we think is the biggest story of the week, the most remarkable story, the sleeper story, and then our favourite story. Then we're going to see if we can agree on any winners. I do not have high hopes of that.
No, neither do I, based on past experience.
All right, let's jump into it. What do you think was the biggest story of the week?
I'm sure I'm going to win this one. Maybe you'll agree with me on this one. COP26, the UN Climate Change Summit in Glasgow. The biggest story of the week, of the month, of the year. That's my call. Now, it's very popular to say COP26 has been a failure, but I'd argue otherwise. India turning up and saying carbon neutrality was its goal by 27 is very, very significant. No one expected it. They're the third largest emitter in the world behind China and the US, and the fact that they have given that commitment means that COP26 is a success. I'll give you some other examples. 100 nations, including Brazil and Indonesia, have signed up to stop deforestation across the globe. Now, forests absorb about 30% of carbon dioxide emissions. The fact that 100 nations, including really big forest areas and really big deforesters, such as Brazil and Indonesia, the fact that they've signed up, that is a real win for this conference. Also, the fact that 100 nations have agreed to reduce methane is also really significant. Now, Australia is not committing to that one. Scott Morrison has said that we're not going to put specific targets on activities. Overall, we'll get to carbon neutrality by 2050. But 100 nations have agreed to reducing methane. Now, of course, that's produced from agriculture, think cows, and production and transport of coal, natural gas and oil. I also think, Michael, that the publicity from COP26 for the cause of climate change has been a real success. When you get billionaires throwing money at the problem, celebrities like Leonardo DiCaprio, Cher and Pitbull using their social media influence to help people think about climate change, and when you get rich countries putting in billions of dollars to help poorer countries, that's all a really good outcome. Beat that.
You know what, Sean? I don't think this is a very fair fight. You have picked not just the biggest story around, you've picked, I would agree, probably the biggest story of the year, but I'm still going to have a crack.
Give me an alternative anyway.
I'm going to give you an alternative because I'm not going to give up quite that easily. For me, the biggest story this week is a little closer to home, and it is one that I think a lot of investors would be feeling quite keenly this week. It is the big one-day moves in share prices this week, and there are some really interesting examples. I'll start with Westpac. So Westpac's share price fell by more than 6% in one day after the bank unveiled a disappointing full-year result, then another 2% the next day. There are a few reasons for it. Poor performance from its institutional bank, lots of extra costs, largely from about 3,000 extra staff. Many of them were brought on to help with compliance. But when banks move by that much in one day, that is a big story. And so many people hold shares in the banks that when that happens, it does affect a lot of people. Domino's is another example of big one-day moves this week, down 18% in one day. Few reasons for that one as well. Not being able to provide profit guidance due to uncertainty. Sales in Japan were faltering a bit. High food prices, high energy prices. Really wasn't a good day for the pizza maker. And it's particularly bad when you consider that this was a stock that until recently has been a share market darling and has just been growing and growing both here and internationally. Even insurer IAG had one of these big moves this week, down more than 6%, downgraded its margin guidance. Really, it's been hit by the cost of storms and weather events. And I mean, how can you compete with an earthquake?
You can't.
You really can't. Really, for me, it just shows that you need nerves of steel to be an investor when you have these massive moves on any given day, sometimes without a huge amount of warning. Then you do need to be pretty tough.
Yeah.
But that's why I think it's the biggest story of the week. Is it bigger than yours? Probably not.
Probably not. The Domino's was an astounding day for that group. It's funny, its CEO, Don May, is a real enthusiast. And when you see him, he's just energy exudes. Now, I didn't see the conference this week when they outlined their results, but clearly he wasn't showing that enthusiasm. And I'm sure it's kind of the downside of being such an enthusiastic leader is everyone's reading your body language the whole time.
Yeah, and anything less than maximum enthusiasm is going to
exactly
seem
right.
pretty dire for everybody, isn't it? So
That's right. That's
all
right.
Well, let's agree that I think COP26 is probably the biggest story of the week. So that is 1-0. Not a great start for me. What's your most remarkable story of the week?
Well, I think the most remarkable story of the week is the massive disagreement between the Reserve Bank and financial markets about interest rates. The Reserve Bank this week said rates were unlikely to rise before late 2023, or at least the official cash rate won't rise before late 2023, but it will stop targeting the yield curve. In a sense, the targeting had already stopped working because 3-year bond yields had started rising because the financial markets weren't listening to the Reserve Bank. Now, that's why fixed-term mortgage rates are rising. They got a scoot along later in the week when Commonwealth Bank, Westpac, among others, lifted those 3-year, 4-year, 5-year mortgage rates. The difference is the Reserve Bank believes inflation in the system now is transitory. It's a result of supply chain bottlenecks around the globe and other COVID factors. Until wage inflation is sustainable, the central bank won't lift rates, and that's still at least a couple of years away. Economists just disagree, not just some, but many. Both AMP Capital's Shane Oliver and Commonwealth Bank's Stephen Halmarick reckon the Reserve Bank will be forced to lift rates in about 12 months as inflation comes through. Businesses are feeling the heat. Ingham's, Domino's, you just mentioned, CSR, they were all out this week saying they're under price pressures. Input prices are going up, food, grain, transport as well. What's remarkable is not that everyone doesn't agree with the Reserve Bank, it's just how much they disagree with the central bank. That's my contender for the most remarkable story of the week.
It is pretty good. I reckon I've got you on this one. My most remarkable story for the week is related to your first story today. It is something that took place at the COP26 Climate Change Summit. It wasn't really Australia's involvement. It was the sideshow that was happening between Scott Morrison and Emmanuel Macron. So things were already tense going into it, and so there was an expectation that things might come to a bit of a head at some point when the two leaders would run into each other following the cancellation of that $90 billion submarine deal. Didn't help that US President Joe Biden described the handling of it by Australia as clumsy. Then there was that, I would say, slightly awkward moment when Scott Morrison interrupted Macron to say a quick hello and just happened to be right in front of the cameras, felt a little bit too keen. And I think Macron probably didn't quite like getting blindsided by that. And he then later told Australian media that he didn't think he knew that Scott Morrison had lied to him over the cancellation of the submarine deal. So that was already pretty remarkable. But when the private text message conversation between the two of them was released, really as proof that Morrison hadn't lied, to me, it just made it worse. And I'm clearly not the only one that thought that. The French ambassador said relations had hit a new low. For me, it's the most remarkable story this week because we should be better at this. Australia should be better at basically diplomacy. Diplomacy is a high-stakes game. We haven't played this one well. And worst of all, in trying to prove that we can be trusted, we've actually shown that we can't be.
Yes, okay. I think that is more remarkable than my story. I think it's one all. I just think on this, Macron is no angel in any of this. He's got a general election to win next year. And obviously the loss of the $90 billion subs deal would have hurt his electoral chances. If he wins next year, he is the senior leader in Europe with Angela Merkel stepping down. Now, our papers were all about the Morrison-Macron spat. The UK papers were all about a Boris Johnson-Emmanuel Macron spat about fishing rights between the two countries. Macron really did play the media pretty hard and was very parochial about French interests. And I think we shouldn't lose sight of that. The point, though, where Australia lost the moral high ground undoubtedly was the leaking of the texts between the two leaders. I think that was almost unforgivable to actually do that. And certainly Scott Morrison lost the high ground there. All in all, Michael, I'm talking around the subject. Yep, you win. 1-1.
Well, that's 1-1. This is great. On to the sleeper story. What is the story this week that probably hasn't had the attention that it deserves?
Well, this is a huge story that got very little attention unless you're a reader of the Financial Review, which did give it a good run. On Wednesday, the Commonwealth Bank said customers would be able to buy and sell cryptocurrencies using the CommBank app. 10 digital currencies will be available, and so far we know they include Bitcoin, Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash, which is designed for payments using Bitcoin, and Litecoin. Now, the Commonwealth Bank app is a way of investing in cryptocurrencies. You won't be able to use the app to actually pay for products using those cryptos. CEO Matt Common said people might invest in cryptos as a hedge against inflation and for plenty of other reasons, and Commonwealth Bank wants to be part of that. Another reason, though he didn't quite say that, is that some of the competitors in the payment space, like Square, which is just purchased Afterpay, and PayPal, already allow users to trade and spend Bitcoin. And in Australia, the Australian Tax Office has said about 600,000 Australians have already invested in digital assets in recent years. This is a huge move when Australia's biggest bank and market leader gives its nod of approval to cryptos. It validates digital currencies, even if you can't actually spend them via the app yet. I bet that's coming. This was a great leap forward for cryptos and definitely the sleeper story of the week.
It is a very good sleeper story. And I like the fact that you have chosen a very modern sleeper story about a very forward-thinking industry. And my sleeper story is about one of our oldest industries, and it is about Australian farmers. It's about agriculture in Australia. And for me, the sleeper story is about how well many Australian farmers are actually doing at the moment after some really tough years. It has had a bit of coverage every now and then. You see stories popping up about it, but you put it all together and it actually is not looking too bad. You've got high prices for wheat. You've got high prices for cotton, great prices for canola. All of these are benefiting Australia and Australian farmers. Cattle prices are absolutely booming. In a lot of these sectors, production is down slightly on, say, last year, but because these prices are so high, the total value should actually be higher than it was last year and certainly higher than it was a couple of years before when we were really in the grip of drought. There are a few challenges, shortages of harvest workers. That's really due to closed borders, supply chain challenges and really expensive shipping. But overall, it's looking pretty good. And it's a really great Australian success story. I think when farmers are going well, I think we all feel pretty good about that. And we really don't hear that much about it. And a few of these little stories popping up this week made me think, put it all together, and you've got a good contender for Sleeper Story of the Week.
That's a fair call. I'm not sure, though, that I'm going to concede at this point. You are the judge and the jury in this, though, Michael, so you can actually decide what wins. I totally agree. The Australian farmers doing well. That's a very good story.
I'm going to give it to you, though. I'm still going to give it to you. You've taken that one out. 2-1. On to the final one for today. Favourite story of the week. This is a very subjective category, this one. But I am still going to be the judge on this, so give it to me. What is your favourite story?
Well, maybe it's because I picked the winner of the Melbourne Cup for the first time probably ever. But it's really the reinvigoration of horse racing in Australia. Last weekend, I turned the TV on. Both Channel 7 and 10 were showing horse racing. One, the Melbourne Carnival, one, the Sydney Carnival. Can you imagine being a visitor to Australia, turning the TV on, and two of the three major free-to-air broadcasters are showing thoroughbred racing? Incredible. Racing, because it's been allowed to go on, has actually had a really good COVID period. Prize money's up about 82% in the last decade. Australia now has 72 races a year worth more than $1 million in prize money. Now, that's twice as many as 6 years ago. Europe has just 18. The US has 49. According to the Thoroughbred Breeders Association, international buyers spent almost $79 million in yearlings and breeding stock last financial year, which was up from $71 million, and that's despite them not actually being able to come to Australia. I just think the theatre of racing is quite spectacular, involving all sorts of people from the very rich to the very poor. Now, it ain't perfect. Gambling is a major social problem in society, no doubt about it. The ubiquity of gaming ads I find really unsettling. The industry still needs to do more on horse welfare. But for just a week, I like to forget those things and just enjoy the racing.
It's a very good story, and it was a spectacular week of racing. My favourite story, though, is about what happened quite early in the week. Actually, Microsoft regained the crown as the world's most valuable company.
Michael, I'm going to concede already. Go on.
It's hard not to concede. These figures are enormous. So Microsoft really took over when its share price rose 2.2%. That was right at the beginning of the week, happened over the weekend. Took its value to $2.49 trillion US dollars. It then continued past the $2.5 trillion mark. At the same time, Apple's share price fell back a bit, meaning that Microsoft was number one. What I find really incredible about this, though, is the speed of growth. Apple's the one that's hit most of the milestones first in most cases. It was the first to reach $1 trillion in August 2018, then $2 trillion in 2020. But for both Apple and Microsoft to now be around the $2.5 trillion mark, for me, that is just phenomenal growth. And that's why it's my favorite.
Okay, I'm conceding.
I was going to say that, look, horse racing, not everyone loves horse racing, but everybody loves tech billionaires. So that's why we're going to say...
They go together. Tech billionaires own horses, don't they?
That's actually right. So we almost have a point each for that one.
No, yours. I concede.
Fantastic. 2-2. That is how we're going to end the week. Just a quick reminder that we've had some great interviews this week as well. Everything from the best way to find value in the share market with Forager Funds Management through to Labor frontbencher Tanya Plibersek on the world of politics. If you want to listen to any of those interviews or indeed any of the shows from the past week, all of them are available on your favourite podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au, where you can also sign up for our newsletter. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael. Enjoy your Saturday.
Thank you. Don't forget that tomorrow, Sean and I will be back with Adam Lang from the Fear and Greed team to have a bit of a lighter look at some of the news around the place. I'm Michael Thompson. Have a good Saturday and a great weekend.